The man the world celebrated as a humanitarian hero was the same man who shattered my bones, stole my child, and drove me to fake my own death. I thought hiding was survival, until the night a stranger with 5 grieving children pulled over on a frozen roadside and offered me something I'd forgotten existed: safety. This is the story of how I went from a battered wife with no name, no future, and no hope, to the mother who chose to fight back. Please stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far my story travels. The November wind cut through Mara Collins like 1,000 tiny blades, each gust a reminder that she was alive. Barely, painfully, miraculously alive. She sat hunched on the metal bench at the Greyhound bus stop on Route 9, her entire world reduced to a thin cotton dress, a stolen $20 bill folded in her bra, and bruises that mapped 12 years of hell across her skin like a grotesque atlas of suffering. Her wrists throbbed where Victor's fingers had dug in just hours earlier. Purple and yellow, the marks looked like twisted bracelets, the kind of jewelry that came with threats instead of promises. The kind that reminded you that love, or what some people called love, could break every bone in your body while whispering that you deserved it. It was 11:47 p.m. Mara knew because she'd been watching the digital clock inside the shuttered convenience store across the street, counting each minute as both a victory and a terror. Every minute away from Victor Hartwell was a minute closer to either freedom or death. She wasn't sure which would come first. The bus she'd been waiting for had broken down 30 miles away. The attendant had told her this through the crackling speaker of the payphone before the line went dead. No refund, no alternative, just static and the click of disconnection. The sound of hope evaporating into the November night. Mara pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little body heat she had left. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper. The streetlight above her flickered, struggling against the wind, casting her shadow in epileptic bursts across the cracked pavement. She thought about the baby. Always the baby. 6 months ago she'd been pregnant, terrified, yes, but also desperately, secretly hopeful. Maybe a child would soften Victor. Maybe motherhood would give her a purpose beyond being his perfect, silent, obedient wife. Maybe the baby would be the reason she finally found the courage to leave. But Victor had other plans. The accident on the stairs had been no accident. The shove had been calculated, precise, delivered with the same cold efficiency he used in his boardroom negotiations. She'd tumbled 13 steps, her screams swallowed by the marble walls of their pristine estate. By the time she reached the bottom, her body had already begun the process of letting go, of the pregnancy, of hope, of the last shred of her that believed in fairy tales. Victor had called 911 himself, playing the devastated husband with Oscar-worthy performance. "My wife fell, please, she's pregnant, hurry!" But in the hospital room, when the nurses left and the doctor explained the miscarriage with sympathetic, practiced words, Victor had leaned close to her ear, his breath hot against her skin, and whispered, "Now maybe you'll remember that your only job is to be beautiful and silent. You failed at giving me an heir, don't sway it. Don't fail at anything else." That was the moment Mara Collins began planning her death. Not her real death. Victor didn't deserve that satisfaction, but the death of her existence in his world. She would become a ghost, a memory, a tragic news story about a depressed woman who couldn't recover from her loss and simply disappeared. It had taken 4 months of meticulous, terrifying preparation. 4 months of hiding cash from grocery money, $5 here, $10 there, buried in tampon boxes Victor would never touch. 4 months of memorizing the security system's blind spots, the guards' shift changes, the precise time the perimeter cameras cycled to the east gate. 4 months of watching her husband's face on magazine covers and television interviews, the world celebrating Victor Hartwell as a visionary philanthropist, a champion of mental health awareness, a devoted husband mourning his wife's struggles with depression and grief. Every smile he gave to cameras was a knife in her chest. Every charitable donation he announced was blood money, paid for with her silence, her suffering, her stolen child. The escape itself had been chaos wrapped in adrenaline. She'd waited until Victor left for his annual charity gala, the one where he'd receive another humanitarian award, another standing ovation, another opportunity to prove to the world that he was a good man. She'd disabled the bedroom alarm using the code she'd memorized from watching his fingers on the keypad, squeezed through the bathroom window that was supposed to be painted shut but wasn't, dropped 12 feet into the rose garden that had always been more thorns than flowers, and ran. Just ran. Through the estate grounds, through the woods that bordered their property, through the creek that soaked her shoes and made her feet numb, through the service road where delivery trucks came and went without question, through the industrial park where no one looked twice at a woman stumbling in the dark, through the neighborhoods that blurred together until she finally reached the bus station with her lungs burning and her vision spotting and her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. That had been 8 hours ago. Now, sitting on this bench, watching her breath form small clouds in the frigid air, Mara wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe death, real death, would have been kinder than this limbo. At least death had a destination. This was just cold, endless waiting for either rescue or recapture. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The $20 in her bra was supposed to last until she reached the women's shelter 3 towns over. But that plan had died with the broken-down bus. She had no phone, no ID. She'd left her driver's license behind because Victor tracked everything. No coat, and nowhere to go. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow. Mara closed her eyes and tried to remember warmth. She tried to remember a time before Victor, before the marriage that had started with roses and promises and ended with blood and silence. But the memories were slippery, faded, like photographs left too long in sunlight. Had she ever been warm? Had she ever been safe? Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter. Mara's body tensed instinctively. Every car was a potential threat. Every stranger could be one of Victor's security team. He had connections everywhere: police, private investigators, politicians who owed him favors. If he wanted her found, she would be found. It was only a matter of time. The vehicle slowed as it approached the bus stop. Mara's heart lurched. She calculated distances, escape routes. The woods were 50 yards behind her. Could she make it? Could her frozen legs even move fast enough? But the vehicle wasn't the black SUV she feared. It was a dented blue minivan, its sliding door covered in fingerprint smudges and what looked like old juice box stains. It pulled into the bus stop parking lot and idled there, exhaust puffing in gray clouds. Mara remained perfectly still, prey instinct overriding everything else. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with broad shoulders hunched against the cold. Dark hair, stubble that suggested he'd skipped shaving for a few days, jeans and a work jacket with Mercer Construction embroidered on the chest. He looked tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, that shows in the way you move like everything weighs too much. He looked at Mara for a long moment, and she saw his expression shift from surprise to concern to something that looked like recognition, not of her specifically, but of the situation, of desperation, of danger. "Hey," he called out, his voice careful, non-threatening. "You okay?" Mara didn't answer, couldn't answer. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but she was so cold, so tired, so utterly depleted that running seemed impossible. The man took a few steps closer but maintained distance, his hands visible at his sides. "I'm Grant Mercer." He gestured to his jacket, as if the embroidered name was proof of trustworthiness. "I'm just heading home from a job site. Saw you sitting here and it's gonna snow soon. This bus stop doesn't have overnight service. Haven't for years since they cut the routes." Mara's voice came out as barely a whisper. "The bus? They said there was a bus." Grant's expression softened with understanding. "Yeah, they say a lot of things. Been meaning to take down that old schedule board, but nobody ever does." He paused, studying her more carefully now, and she saw the moment he noticed the bruises, the too thin dress, the way she was shaking. His jaw tightened. "Listen, I don't know your story, and you don't have to tell me, but it's 23 degrees out here and dropping. There's a diner about 2 miles up the road, open all night. I can give you a ride there if you want. They've got heat, coffee, and the owner's a friend. Good people." "I don't have money," Mara heard herself say, the admission shameful and small. "Didn't ask for money," Grant replied gently. "Asked if you wanted to get out of the cold." Every instinct Mara had spent 12 years developing screamed that this was a trap. Men didn't help without wanting something. Kindness was a currency that demanded payment. Trust was the lie that came before the hurt. But her body was shutting down. She could feel it, the sluggish heaviness in her limbs, the way her thoughts were becoming fuzzy at the edges. Hypothermia didn't care about caution. Why? The word came out broken. Grant was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he understood more than he was saying. Because somebody stopped for me once, when I needed it. And because I've got 5 kids at home who'd never forgive me if I drove past somebody who needed help. 5 kids. The detail was oddly specific, oddly humanizing. Mara's frozen brain tried to process this. A man with 5 children driving a stained minivan, offering help to a stranger at midnight. Either this was an elaborate trap, or it was exactly what it appeared to be. Exhausted kindness from someone who understood what it meant to be desperate. She made a decision born from the simple fact that she had no other options. "Okay," she whispered. Grant nodded, walking slowly back to the minivan and opening the passenger door. The interior light revealed a chaos of booster seats, backpacks, forgotten lunchboxes, and children's drawings taped to the dashboard. The mundane, beautiful mess of family life. Mara stood on legs that barely supported her weight and walked to the van. Each step was a small act of faith, or maybe just surrender. She climbed into the passenger seat, and the warmth from the vehicle's heater hit her like a physical embrace. She gasped, her body responding to the temperature change with violent shivers. Grant closed her door carefully, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. He didn't look at her, didn't ask questions, just put the van in drive and pulled back onto the empty highway. The diner was exactly where he said it would be, a chrome-sided building with neon signs that promised breakfast all day and home cooking. Grant parked near the entrance, close to the light. "You coming in?" he asked. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Inside, the diner was warm and bright, smelling of coffee and bacon and maple syrup, scents so normal, so wonderfully ordinary that Mara felt tears prick her eyes. A handful of late-night customers sat scattered across the booths, a truck driver nursing coffee, a nurse in scrubs eating pie, an elderly couple sharing a basket of fries. Grant guided her to a corner booth, away from windows, and she realized he'd done that intentionally. Protection. Privacy. A waitress appeared, somewhere in her 60s, with reading glasses hanging from a chain and a name tag that read Dottie. She took one look at Mara and her expression shifted from professional friendliness to maternal concern. "Coffee?" she asked, but she was already pouring, already sliding the cup into Mara's frozen hands. "And whatever she wants to eat," Grant added. "On my tab." Dottie nodded, understanding passing between them in some silent language of people who'd seen things, who knew not to ask questions that would make someone run. When the waitress left, Grant wrapped his hands around his own coffee cup and finally looked at Mara directly. His eyes were kind, dark brown, tired but not cold, not calculating, not dangerous. "I'm not going to ask you what happened," he said quietly, "and I'm not going to call anyone, but I need you to know that you're safe here. Dottie knows me. She knows my kids. This diner it's a good place. People look out for each other." "Why are you helping me?" Mara asked, the question desperate and raw. Grant was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. "My wife died 2 years ago. Car accident. Sudden, senseless, completely random. And in the months after, when I was drowning, when I had 5 8-year-olds who were broken and grieving, and I couldn't figure out how to keep us all alive, people showed up, neighbors, friends, complete strangers who just helped, brought food, watched the kids, sat with me when I couldn't stop crying. They didn't ask for reasons. They just saw someone who needed help, and they helped." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "So that's what I'm doing? I'm showing up, and whatever you need, a meal, a ride somewhere, a phone call, I'll help with that. No strings, no questions." Mara felt something crack open in her chest, some frozen place that hadn't felt warmth in so long she'd forgotten it existed. Dottie returned with pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, a feast that Mara hadn't ordered but that appeared anyway, the universe's way of saying you deserve to be fed. Eat, honey, Dottie said gently, squeezing Mara's shoulder. Take your time. Mara picked up her fork with shaking hands and took a bite of pancake. The taste exploded in her mouth, sweet, buttery, real. She'd forgotten that food could taste like something other than fear. She ate slowly, mechanically, while Grant sipped his coffee and occasionally looked at his phone, checking what she assumed were messages from whoever was watching his children. When she finally pushed the empty plate away, feeling almost human again, Grant spoke. I don't want to overstep, he said carefully, but it's going to snow tonight. Heavy, according to the weather. And that bus you were waiting for? It's not coming, not tonight, maybe not for days, depending on what broke down. So I'm going to offer something, and you can say no. I mean that you can absolutely say no, and I'll figure out another option. But, he took a breath, I have a guest room. Well, technically it's my home office, but there's a fold-out couch. My kids are asleep. The house is chaos. It's not fancy, but it's warm and it's safe. You could stay tonight, get some real rest. And in the morning, when you've had sleep and food and time to think, we can figure out what comes next. I can drive you wherever you need to go, help you make calls, whatever you need. Mara stared at him, searching for the trap, the angle, the hidden cost. But all she saw was exhaustion, sincerity, and the particular kind of understanding that only comes from surviving your own nightmares. I don't even know you, she whispered. I know, Grant replied, and that's terrifying, but I think maybe you don't have a lot of options right now, and I think maybe you're running from something bad enough that taking a chance on a stranger might be better than going back. He didn't ask her to confirm, didn't push for details, just laid out the truth as he saw it and waited. Mara thought about the alternative, going back outside into the cold, waiting for a bus that wouldn't come, using her last $20 for what? A motel room that would ask for ID she didn't have? Walking until she collapsed? Or worse, being found. Victor's security team tracking her phone records, her credit card, every digital footprint she'd spent 12 years creating. She'd been careful, but careful wasn't the same as invisible. What if... Mara's voice broke. What if someone's looking for me? Grant's expression darkened with understanding. Then my house is the last place they'd look. I'm nobody. Just a single dad with too many kids and not enough sleep. No connection to anyone. No reason for anyone to notice. He paused. And for what it's worth, if someone showed up looking for you, they'd have to go through me first. And I don't move easy. It was the quiet certainty in his voice that decided it. Not bravado, not a hero complex, just the simple statement that he would stand between danger and someone who needed protection. Mara had spent 12 years with a man who claimed to love her while systematically destroying her. Maybe it was time to trust someone who wasn't claiming anything except the desire to help. Okay, she said. Just for tonight. Grant nodded, relief visible in the way his shoulders relaxed slightly. He paid the bill, left a generous tip that Dottie accepted with a knowing nod, and led Mara back to the minivan. The drive to his house took 15 minutes, winding through suburban streets lined with small, well-kept homes. Grant's house was a 2-story colonial with a slightly overgrown lawn and a minivan-shaped dent in the driveway. Christmas lights hung from the gutters, half of them dark, as if someone had started decorating but run out of energy halfway through. Inside, the house was exactly as promised, chaotic, lived in, warm. The entryway was cluttered with shoes in various sizes, coats hanging from hooks, backpacks piled near the stairs. The living room beyond held a sectional couch covered in blankets and throw pillows, a coffee table buried under schoolwork and drawings, and a television paused mid-movie. Stay quiet, Grant whispered. Kids are asleep. Babysitter's probably asleep too on the couch. He led her through the living room where a teenage girl was indeed passed out on the sectional, phone still in her hand. Grant grabbed a blanket from the back of the couch and draped it over her carefully before gesturing for Mara to follow him upstairs. The second-floor hallway was lined with doors, most of them slightly ajar. Mara caught glimpses of bunk beds, stuffed animals, glow-in-the-dark stars on ceilings. The home office Grant mentioned was at the end of the hall, a small room with a desk, filing cabinets, and indeed a fold-out couch that looked like it had seen better days, but was covered in clean sheets and a thick comforter. Bathrooms across the hall, Grant said quietly. Towels in the cabinet. There's probably some women's clothes in the closet. My wife's things that that are still here. You're welcome to anything that fits. And if you need anything at all, my room's the first door on the left. Don't hesitate. Mara nodded, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of it all. Grant started to leave, then paused at the door. I know you don't have any reason to trust me, but you're safe here. I promise you that. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't reach here. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Mara stood in the middle of the small room, surrounded by the evidence of someone else's life. Family photos on the desk, children's artwork pinned to a bulletin board, a wedding picture showing Grant with a beautiful woman who had the same dark hair and warm smile as him. Dead 2 years ago, he'd said, sudden and senseless. Mara looked at the woman's face and felt a strange kinship. Both of them ghosts in different ways, both of them leaving holes in the world that still echoed with loss. She walked to the bathroom and caught sight of herself in the mirror for the first time since leaving Victor's house. The woman staring back was unrecognizable, hollow-eyed, bruised, gaunt, with tangled hair and a dress that hung off her frame like a shroud. Mara turned on the shower and stepped under the spray, still wearing her dress, letting the hot water wash away the filth and fear and blood of her escape. She stood there until the water ran cold, until her skin was pink and raw, until she'd cried herself empty. Then she wrapped herself in towels, found an old t-shirt and sweatpants in the closet, both smelling faintly of lavender detergent, and returned to the fold-out couch. The sheets were soft. The comforter was heavy. The house was quiet except for the gentle sounds of breathing from the rooms nearby, children sleeping, safe, loved. For the first time in 12 years, Mara Collins closed her eyes without fear. And she slept. Mara woke to the sound of chaos. Not the violent, terrifying chaos she'd grown accustomed to over 12 years. No slamming doors, no shouted accusations, no sharp crack of palm against skin. This was different. This was the chaos of life happening at full volume. Running footsteps thundering downstairs, competing voices arguing over bathroom priority, the clatter of dishes, the beep of a microwave, and underneath it all, the low, steady voice of Grant trying to orchestrate order from pandemonium. Nora, let your sister go first. She's been waiting. Evan, we don't wear pajamas to school. Rowan, buddy, I can't understand you when you whisper from the hallway. Ivy, please don't cry. We'll find your other shoe. Eli, if you draw on the wall one more time, I'm taking away your markers for a week. Mara opened her eyes to morning light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, her body tensing with the instinctive panic that had become second nature. Then memory returned. The bus stop, the diner, Grant's quiet kindness, the promise of safety. She sat up slowly, her body protesting. The bruises on her wrists had deepened to angry purple overnight, and her muscles ached from the combination of her escape and sleeping in a position that wasn't pure defensive tension. But she was warm, clean, alive. The digital clock on the desk read 7:23 a.m. Mara stood, smoothing down the borrowed t-shirt and sweatpants, and opened the door carefully. The hallway was a flurry of activity, children in various states of readiness rushing between rooms, all of them moving with the chaotic coordination of a well-rehearsed dance. They were quintuplets, Mara realized with a start. 5 children who looked about 8 years old, each distinct but carrying the same fundamental features that marked them as siblings born together. 2 girls, 3 boys, all with dark hair like Grant's, and varying degrees of morning cooperation. The first to notice her was a girl with fierce eyes and her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She stopped mid-stride, blocking the bathroom door she'd been racing toward, and stared at Mara with undisguised suspicion. "Who are you?" the girl demanded, her voice carrying a protectiveness that seemed far too old for her small frame. The question brought all other activity to a halt. 4 other children appeared in doorways, looking at Mara with expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness to outright fear. Grant emerged from what must have been his bedroom, holding a brush in one hand and a hair tie in the other, looking harried but relieved to see Mara awake. "Kids, this is Mara. She's a friend who needed a place to stay last night. Mara, these are my quintuplets. The interrogator blocking the bathroom is Nora." Nora didn't soften. If anything, her stance became more defensive. "We don't know her. Why is she wearing Mom's clothes?" The words hit the room like a grenade. The other children's expressions shifted, some to sadness, some to anger, one little girl's eyes filling with immediate tears. Grant's face flickered with pain, but his voice remained steady. "Because I offered them to her, and Mom would have wanted me to help someone who needed help. Now please, everyone needs to finish getting ready. We have 17 minutes before we need to leave for school." But none of the children moved. They stood frozen, 5 pairs of eyes fixed on Mara with varying degrees of judgment, fear, and something that looked like betrayal. Mara understood. She was an intruder in their grief, a stranger wearing their mother's clothes, appearing overnight like a ghost that didn't belong in their carefully maintained world. She'd experienced enough loss to recognize the fierce territorialism that came with it, the desperate need to keep everything exactly as it was because change meant accepting that the person was never coming back. "I'm sorry," Mara said quietly, her voice still rough from disuse and crying. "I didn't mean to intrude. Grant was kind enough to help me when I had nowhere else to go. I'll be gone soon, and you won't have to see me again." The little girl who'd been crying, Ivy, Mara would learn later, let out a small sob and ran back into her room, slamming the door. "Ivy, wait!" Grant started, but another child, a boy with thoughtful eyes and messy hair, shook his head. "Let her be, Dad. You know she needs time." The boy looked at Mara with an expression that was more analytical than hostile. "I'm Evan," that was Ivy. "She's scared of everything since Mom died. You look scary." "Evan," Grant's voice held warning. "What?" "She does. She's got bruises, and she looks like she's been crying, and she's too skinny. Ivy gets scared when people look hurt." Mara felt the observation like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it was painfully, honestly true. She did look scary. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd barely survived. The girl with the ponytail, Nora, continued her assessment. "Where did you come from? Why don't you have your own clothes? Are you running away from something?" "Nora, that's enough," Grant said firmly. "Everyone, room, now. Finish getting ready. We'll talk about this later." "But Dad, now." The command in his voice was gentle but absolute. The children dispersed reluctantly, Nora throwing one last suspicious glare at Mara before disappearing into the bathroom. Only one child remained, a small boy with paint-stained fingers who'd been standing silently in a doorway, watching everything with wide, unblinking eyes. Grant knelt down to the boy's level. "Eli, buddy, you okay?" The boy didn't answer, just kept staring at Mara. Then, in a voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it, he said, "She has the same eyes as Mom did, after." Grant went very still. "After what, Eli?" "After the accident, in the hospital, before she left." The boy's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was simply reporting an observation rather than devastating everyone in the hallway. Her eyes looked like they hurt, like they saw something bad and can't stop seeing it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Grant's expression crumbled for just a moment, raw grief flashing across his face before he schooled it back into parental composure. He pulled his son into a tight hug, and Mara saw the boy's small arms wrap around his father's neck with the desperation of someone still learning how to hold on. "Go finish getting dressed," Grant said when he finally released Eli. "We're having cereal this morning because I didn't have time to make anything else." Eli nodded and wandered back to his room, still moving like someone underwater, processing things too big for his small frame to contain. When they were alone in the hallway, Grant turned to Mara with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, they're not usually like this. Well, actually they are exactly like this. Protective, suspicious, and occasionally brutal with their honesty. Losing their mom destroyed them in different ways, and they're still figuring out how to be people again." "You don't have to apologize," Mara said. "They're right to be suspicious. I'm a stranger. I am wearing their mother's clothes. And Eli," she swallowed hard. "Eli's right too. I do have eyes that have seen bad things." Grant studied her for a long moment, and she saw him making the same calculation he'd made last night. How much to ask, how much to respect her privacy, how to help without pushing too hard. "Do you want breakfast?" he finally asked. "Fair warning, it's going to be chaos. 5 kids eating cereal is basically a natural disaster with milk." Despite everything, Mara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. I don't want to make things harder for you. You're not, but I understand if you'd rather stay up here until we leave. School drop-off is in about 15 minutes, and then the house will be quiet. We can talk then about what comes next. Mara nodded, grateful for the exit, but something in her resisted. She'd spent 12 years hiding, making herself small, avoiding conflict. Maybe it was time to stop running from uncomfortable situations. I'll come down, she said, if that's okay. Grant's expression softened with something that looked like respect. It's okay. The kitchen was exactly what Mara expected, a large space that had probably once been organized but now bore the marks of 5 children and a father who was barely keeping his head above water. The table was covered in school permission slips, library books, and several attempted homework assignments. The counter held a line of lunchboxes in different colors, each one half-packed with varying levels of success. The refrigerator was plastered with artwork, spelling tests, and a large calendar marking orthodontist appointments, soccer practices, and something labeled grief counselor, all kids. The quintuplets were already seated at the table, bowls of cereal in front of them, eating with the silent concentration of children who'd been told to behave but weren't happy about it. Mara took a seat at the far end of the table, making herself as unobtrusive as possible. Grant poured her a cup of coffee without asking, placing it in front of her with a small smile before returning to the counter to finish packing lunches. The silence was oppressive. Mara could feel 5 pairs of eyes flickering toward her, assessing, judging, trying to figure out if she was a threat. It was Rowan, she would later learn, the quiet boy who'd been hiding in the hallway, who broke the tension. What happened to your wrists? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rowan, Nora hissed. What? I'm just asking. It looks like it hurts. Mara looked down at her wrists where the bruises were clearly visible under the borrowed long sleeves she'd pushed up while sleeping. She could lie. She could deflect. She could do what she'd done for 12 years and pretend everything was fine. But Eli's words echoed in her mind. She has the same eyes as Mom did. After. These children knew suffering. They knew loss. They knew what it looked like when someone was barely holding themselves together. Lying to them would be an insult to their intelligence and their experience. I was married to someone who hurt me, Mara said quietly. I left, and these are the marks from leaving. They'll heal. The silence that followed was different now, not hostile, but processing. 5 children considering this new information, weighing it against their own understanding of the world. My friend Sarah's mom had marks like that, Evan said, his voice clinical, analytical. Sarah said her dad got arrested and now she only sees him during supervised visits. Is your husband arrested? Not yet, Mara admitted. But I hope he will be someday. Why not now? This from Nora, her suspicion shifting to something that looked like outrage. If he hurt you, why isn't he in jail? Because sometimes the world doesn't work the way it should, Mara said. Sometimes bad people are very good at pretending to be good, and sometimes people like me are too scared to tell anyone what's really happening. Are you still scared? Ivy's voice was tiny, trembling, coming from behind her cereal box, which she was using as a shield. Mara met the little girl's eyes, wide, brown, terrified of everything the world might contain. Yes, she said honestly. I'm still scared, but I'm trying to be brave anyway. Something in Ivy's expression shifted, just slightly. Not acceptance, but understanding. Fear recognizing itself in another person. Grant finished packing the last lunchbox and checked his watch. All right, crew, we need to roll. Shoes, backpacks, jackets. Nora, please make sure Ivy doesn't forget her library book again. Evan, help Rowan find his other sneaker. Eli, wash your hands. You have marker on them from last night's art project. The children scattered in organized chaos, and within minutes they were assembled by the front door, looking like a mismatched but functional unit. Grant grabbed his keys, then turned to Mara. I'll be back in about 30 minutes. There's food in the fridge. Help yourself to anything. The door locks automatically, so you're safe here. And Mara? He waited until she met his eyes. Thank you for being honest with them. They needed that. Then he herded his children out the door, and Mara was alone in the sudden, overwhelming quiet. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, drinking coffee that was stronger than she was used to, looking at the artwork covering the refrigerator. Each piece was labeled with a name and date. Nora's fierce dragons, Evan's precisely drawn robots, Rowan's landscapes, Ivy's flower gardens, Eli's portraits of people with sad, expressive faces. One drawing in particular caught her attention, a family portrait dated 6 months ago. 5 children holding hands with 2 larger figures on either end. One figure was clearly Grant, tall and smiling. The other was a woman drawn in gentle colors, but her face was obscured, scribbled out with heavy black marker. Below the drawing, in careful child handwriting, "We miss you, Mom. Love, Eli." Mara felt tears burning her eyes. This family was broken in ways that matched her own brokenness. Different causes, same result. They were all trying to figure out how to keep breathing when the world had stolen something essential. She was still staring at the drawing when Grant returned, stomping snow off his boots in the entryway. "Sorry that took longer than expected," he called out. Ivy had a meltdown in the car about a substitute teacher, had to talk her down before she'd go into the building. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, shrugging out of his jacket. "You doing okay?" "Your children are remarkable," Mara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Grant's expression softened. "They're terrified, traumatized, and sometimes too smart for their own good. But yeah, they're pretty remarkable." He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "I meant what I said last night. You can stay here as long as you need, but I also need to know, are you in immediate danger? Is someone actively looking for you right now?" Mara considered the question carefully. "My husband is powerful, connected. If he wanted to find me, he could, but I don't think he's looking yet. He was at a charity gala when I left. It's possible the security team hasn't even reported me missing yet, because they think I'm still in the house." She paused, the weight of what she was about to say pressing on her chest. "But when he realizes I'm gone, he'll use every resource he has to find me. And he has a lot of resources." "Does he know about this town? Does he have any connection here?" "No. We live 3 hours away in Riverside Heights. He has no business here, no contacts that I know of. This was random. I was trying to get to a women's shelter in Harrington, but the bus broke down." Grant nodded slowly, processing. "Okay. So you have some time. Not infinite time, but time." He took a sip of coffee. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mara. I can't hide you forever, and I wouldn't want to. Running isn't a permanent solution. But I can give you breathing room to figure out your next move. I can help you contact the right people, domestic violence advocates, lawyers, maybe even law enforcement if you're ready for that." "He'll deny everything," Mara said, her voice hollow. "He's Victor Hartwell. He's on television. He gives speeches about mental health and family values. He's donated millions to women's shelters, for God's sake. Who's going to believe me over him?" "People who know how to recognize abuse," Grant said firmly. "People who've seen this pattern before. And evidence. You said he caused your miscarriage. There are medical records, right? Hospital documentation?" Mara nodded slowly. "Dr. Reese, she's the one who treated me after the fall. She knew. I could see it in her eyes. She knew it wasn't an accident, but I never told her the truth. I was too scared." "Okay, so that's somewhere to start. We can—" Grant was interrupted by his phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen and sighed. "I'm sorry. I have to take this. Work emergency. But we'll figure this out, Mara. I promise." He stepped into the other room, his voice shifting into professional contractor mode, discussing lumber deliveries and permit inspections. Mara sat alone in the kitchen, feeling the weight of possibility settling over her. For the first time in 12 years, someone was offering her more than just escape. They were offering her a path to actually fighting back. The day passed in strange, quiet domesticity. Grant worked from his home office, making calls and reviewing blueprints while Mara explored the house with the careful hesitation of someone still not quite believing she was allowed to exist in this space. She found the laundry room and washed her dress, even though she wasn't sure she'd ever wear it again. It felt important to clean away the physical evidence of her escape. She discovered a bookshelf in the living room filled with children's books and a few worn novels that had clearly belonged to Grant's wife. She even found herself straightening up the kitchen, not because she felt obligated, but because doing something normal, something productive, made her feel slightly more human. Around noon, Grant emerged from his office with an apologetic smile. I know this is probably boring for you, just sitting around. I have to go to a job site for a few hours this afternoon. Supplier delivered the wrong fixtures and I need to sort it out. You're welcome to come with me if you want to get out of the house, or you can stay here. Whatever feels safer. I'll stay, Mara said. If that's okay. Completely okay. Help yourself to anything. TV, books, food, whatever you need. After Grant left, Mara found herself drawn back to the refrigerator, to those drawings that told the story of a family learning to survive loss. She studied each one, seeing the progression of grief. Early drawings showing the mother figure present, later ones showing her absence. The most recent ones showing 5 children trying to remember how to smile. She was still standing there when the front door burst open 3 hours later, a tornado of children in winter coats and competing voices, all trying to tell Grant about their day simultaneously. And then Marcus threw up in math class, and it got on Sarah's shoes. I got 100 on my spelling test, but Mrs. Chen says I need to work on my handwriting. The substitute teacher made us do silent reading for 2 hours, and I finished my entire book. Someone broke the swing at recess, and now we can't use the playground until they fix it. Dad, Eli drew on the bathroom wall again. The chaos flooded the space like water breaking through a dam, and Mara pressed herself against the refrigerator, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of life happening around her. Grant saw her there, looking small and frightened, and gently herded his children toward the living room. Okay, everyone dump backpacks and jackets in the mudroom, please. Snack time, then homework. Mara's still here, and I need you all to remember your manners. The quintuplets noticed her then, their excitement dimming into wariness. They filed past her to the mudroom with varying degrees of acknowledgement. Nora with continued suspicion, Evan with clinical interest, Rowan without meeting her eyes, Ivy peeking from behind her siblings, and Eli staring with that same unblinking intensity from the morning. Grant distributed apple slices and cheese crackers with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times, then settled the children at the kitchen table with homework folders. Mara tried to make herself invisible in the corner, but Eli kept glancing at her, his expression thoughtful. Are you going to stay here? He asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the scratching of pencils and the whispered debate between Nora and Evan about a math problem. The question stopped everything. 4 other children looked up, waiting for her answer with expressions that ranged from hopeful to hostile. Mara looked at Grant, unsure how to respond. He gave her a small nod, permission to be honest. I don't know, she said. I need somewhere safe while I figure out what to do next, and your dad has been kind enough to let me stay for a little while. But I don't want to intrude on your family or make you uncomfortable. You're already intruding, Nora said bluntly. This is our house, our family. We didn't ask for you to be here. Nora, Grant's voice held warning. What? It's true. She's a stranger wearing Mom's clothes and sitting in Mom's chair, and… Nora's voice cracked. And you're just letting her be here like it's normal, but it's not normal. None of this is normal. The little girl's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she pushed back from the table and ran upstairs, her footsteps thundering through the ceiling above them. Grant closed his eyes briefly, exhaling hard. Eli, help your siblings finish homework. I need to go talk to Nora. But before he could move, Mara spoke. Let me. Everyone stared at her. I know what it's like to lose everything, Mara said quietly. I know what it's like when someone new shows up and it feels like they're trying to replace something irreplaceable. I understand her anger. Maybe I'm the right person to hear it. Grant looked uncertain. Mara, you don't have to. I know, but I want to, if she'll let me. After a long moment, Grant nodded. 3rd door on the right. Knock first. If she tells you to go away, respect that. Mara climbed the stairs slowly, her heart hammering. She found Nora's door, decorated with a hand-painted name sign and drawings of dragons, and knocked gently. Go away. The voice was muffled, tear-soaked. It's Mara, not your dad. Can I come in? No. Okay, then I'll just sit out here in the hallway, if that's all right. You don't have to talk to me. I just want you to know someone's here. There was a long silence, then quietly. Why? Because you're hurting, and I know what that feels like. And because you're right, I am intruding. I am a stranger in your house, and you deserve to be angry about that. The door opened a crack. Nora's face appeared, red and blotchy from crying, her fierce eyes now just sad. You're just going to sit there? If you'll let me. Nora considered this, then opened the door wider and sat down on her bed, crossing her arms defensively. Mara entered slowly, sitting on the floor near the door, giving the girl space and control. They sat in silence for several minutes. Mara let Nora have the time to process, to decide if she wanted to speak or just wanted company. Finally, the girl's voice emerged, small and broken. Everyone keeps saying it gets easier, that we'll feel better eventually, that Mom would want us to be happy, but it doesn't get easier, it gets different, but not easier. And now you're here, and Dad's being nice to you, and it feels like he's forgetting her. He's not forgetting her, Mara said gently. I've been here less than 24 hours, and I can already see her everywhere in this house. In the drawings, in the photos, in the way your dad talks about her, in the way all of you still love her. She's not forgotten. She never will be. Then why are you here? The question came out desperate, pleading for an answer that made sense. Mara took a breath. Because I was running away from someone who hurt me very badly. And your dad saw me sitting alone in the cold, and instead of driving past, he stopped. He offered me help when I had nothing and no one. That doesn't mean he's replacing your mom. It just means he's a good person who helps people who need help. Did your husband hit you? Nora asked, her voice very small now. Mara nodded. Yes, among other things, for a very long time. Why didn't you leave sooner? It was the question everyone always asked, the one that had no simple answer. Because I was scared. Because he made me believe I deserved it. Because he convinced me that no one would believe me if I told them the truth. Because leaving someone dangerous is sometimes more dangerous than staying. Nora processed this, her young mind trying to make sense of complexities that even adults struggled with. Are you scared now? Terrified, Mara admitted. But I'm trying to be brave anyway. Kind of like how you're being brave even though you miss your mom every day. Something in Nora's expression softened. Not acceptance, not yet, but understanding. I don't want to share my dad. You don't have to, Mara said. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm just here to heal. And once I figure out how to be safe, I'll leave and you'll have your house back exactly how it was. Promise? Mara hesitated because she wasn't sure what the future held, but she could promise this. I promise I will never try to replace your mother. I promise I will never try to take your dad away from you. And I promise that if I stay, it will only be because I have nowhere else to go, and your dad is kind enough to let me. You and your siblings will always come first. Nora wiped her eyes with her sleeve, considering. Then, in a voice that was still suspicious, but slightly less hostile. Okay, but I'm watching you. I'd expect nothing less, Mara said with a small smile. Over the following days, an uneasy routine developed. Grant went to work sites during school hours. Mara stayed at the house and slowly began helping with small tasks, folding laundry, washing dishes, preparing ingredients for dinner. The children came home each afternoon in their tornado of energy and homework and sibling disputes, and Mara learned to read their patterns. Nora remained watchful, but gradually less hostile, especially after Mara asked her opinion on things rather than assuming authority. Evan treated her like an interesting research subject, asking clinical questions about her injuries and her escape with the detachment of a junior scientist. Rowan said almost nothing, but started leaving his drawings where Mara could see them, small landscapes of places that looked peaceful, safe. Ivy kept her distance, but stopped running away when Mara entered a room. And Eli continued to stare with those knowing, ancient eyes, occasionally making observations that were far too perceptive for an 8-year-old. One evening, while Grant was helping Rowan with math homework and the other children were occupied with various activities, Eli approached Mara where she sat reading on the couch. "Can I draw you?" he asked. Mara looked up, surprised. "Draw me?" "I like drawing people, especially people with interesting faces. Yours is interesting." "Interesting how?" Eli tilted his head, considering. "Sad, but trying not to be. Scared, but trying not to show it. Broken, but trying to fix yourself." He paused. "Like Dad, after Mom died." The observation was delivered without malice, just honest assessment. Mara found herself nodding. Okay, you can draw me. Eli settled on the floor with his sketch pad and pencils, his small face scrunched in concentration. For 20 minutes, he worked in silence while Mara tried to hold still, feeling oddly exposed under the scrutiny of this perceptive child. When he finished, he held up the drawing. Mara stared at it, her breath catching. He'd drawn her sitting on the couch, but the background showed her standing in a doorway with light behind her. Not entering, not leaving, just standing in the threshold. The look on her face in the drawing was raw, vulnerable, hopeful, and terrified all at once. That's how I see you, Eli said simply. Standing in the door, not sure if you're coming or going. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. That's exactly right, she whispered. Do you want to stay? Eli asked, his voice still clinical, curious rather than emotional. I don't know if that's an option. Dad would let you. He's lonely. He tries to hide it, but we all know. And you're lonely too. Maybe lonely people should help each other. Before Mara could respond, Grant called Eli for his bath, and the boy wandered off, leaving his drawing on the coffee table. Mara picked it up carefully, studying the details, the way he'd captured her uncertainty, her fear, her fragile hope. She was still looking at it when Grant returned. The children finally settled for the night. May I? He asked, gesturing to the couch. Mara nodded, and he sat beside her, close but not touching, respecting the careful distance they'd maintained. Eli's quite the artist, Grant said, looking at the drawing. He sees too much. Yeah, he always has. Even before his mom died, he was the one who noticed things nobody else did. Sometimes I worry about him, that he's carrying too much awareness for such a small person. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the house finally quiet after the day's chaos. I called Dr. Reese today, Mara said suddenly, the doctor who treated me after the miscarriage. I used your phone. I hope that's okay. Grant turned to face her fully. Of course it's okay. What did she say? She kept meticulous records. She documented everything, the injuries, her suspicions, her concerns. She said she'd been hoping I'd come forward, that she'd been legally unable to report without my consent, but that she'd preserved everything just in case. She said she'd testify if I ever decided to press charges. That's huge, Mara. I know. But I also called a domestic violence hotline, and they explained how hard these cases are. How men like Victor, wealthy, powerful, publicly beloved, rarely face consequences. How I'd be put through hell, my entire life exposed, every choice questioned. How he'd hire the best lawyers to destroy my credibility. Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. So the question is, are you willing to fight anyway? Not because it'll be easy or even because you're guaranteed to win, but because you deserve justice. And other women deserve to know the truth about who he really is. Mara looked down at her hands, at the bruises that were finally starting to fade to yellow-green. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You walked away from him. You survived 12 years of abuse. You escaped with nothing but your life. You're stronger than you think, Mara, but strength doesn't mean you have to do this alone. If you decide to fight, we'll help you. Me, Dr. Reese, whoever else you need in your corner. Why? The question came out broken, desperate. Why would you do all this for me? I'm nobody, a stranger who showed up broken on your doorstep. Grant turned to face her fully, his expression raw with emotion. Because I know what it's like to lose someone to circumstances beyond your control. I know what it's like to feel helpless while someone you care about suffers. And I couldn't save my wife. That's something I'll carry forever. But maybe I can help you save yourself. Maybe that's worth something. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Mara felt it. The pull toward this man who'd shown her kindness without asking for anything in return, who'd opened his home and his life to a stranger, who looked at her brokenness and saw someone worth fighting for. I should go to bed, she said, standing quickly, needing space before she did something foolish like lean into the comfort he represented. Mara, Grant said as she reached the stairs. She turned back. You're not alone anymore. Whatever you decide, you're not alone. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and climbed to the guest room where she'd spent nearly a week now, sleeping in the fold-out bed that was starting to feel almost like hers. That night, for the first time since arriving, Mara dreamed. Not nightmares of Victor finding her, but memories of the baby she'd lost. Soft dreams of what might have been, gentle and sad, and somehow healing. She woke with tears on her face, but without the usual crushing weight of grief. In the morning, she made a decision. She found Grant in the kitchen, already making breakfast for the quintuplets who would be waking up any minute. "I want to fight," she said. "I want to press charges. I want to tell the truth about who Victor really is. Will you help me?" Grant's face broke into a smile. Not triumphant, but proud, relieved. "Yes. Absolutely yes. We'll start today." And as 5 children thundered down the stairs, demanding pancakes and help finding lost homework, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim her life. The weeks that followed Mara's decision moved with the strange dual rhythm of glacial progress and breakneck momentum. During the day, while Grant worked and the children attended school, Mara met with advocates from the county's Domestic Violence Center. Patient women with worn folders and gentle voices who explained the process of building a case against someone like Victor Hartwell. At night, she helped with homework and dinner, slowly learning the intricate choreography of a household held together by routine and stubborn love. Sarah Chen, the lead advocate assigned to Mara's case, was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many stories like Mara's. She sat across from Mara at the dining room table on a Tuesday morning, spreading documents between them like cards in a dangerous game. "The good news is that Dr. Reese's records are extremely detailed," Sarah said, tapping a thick folder. She documented not just the physical injuries from the miscarriage, but also older bruising she noted during examinations, inconsistencies in your explanations for various injuries over the years, and her own professional concerns. This is gold in cases like yours. "And the bad news?" Mara asked, though she already knew there would be bad news. There was always bad news when powerful men were involved. "The bad news is that Victor Hartwell has spent 12 years building a public image as a philanthropist and advocate. He's donated to women's shelters, for God's sake. He gives speeches about family values and mental health awareness. His lawyers will argue that you're mentally unstable, that your miscarriage triggered a breakdown, that you've constructed elaborate fantasies to cope with grief." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, just honest. "They'll paint you as the unreliable narrator of your own life." Mara felt the familiar weight of hopelessness settling over her shoulders. "So what chance do I have?" "More than you think. Because here's what they can't explain away. The medical records, the witness statements we're gathering, the financial control he exerted over you, the isolation tactics. Abuse follows patterns, Mara, and those patterns leave evidence." Sarah leaned forward, her expression fierce. "But I need you to understand what you're walking into. This will be brutal. They will attack your character, your mental health, every choice you've ever made. You'll be cross-examined about intimate details of your marriage, your sex life, your medical history. They'll try to break you on the stand. Are you prepared for that?" Mara thought about the alternative, continuing to hide, continuing to live in fear, continuing to let Victor control her life even from a distance. She thought about the baby she'd lost, about the 12 years of herself she'd sacrificed to his violence. She thought about the 5 children upstairs who'd watched their father choose to help a stranger, learning that kindness was stronger than fear. "I'm prepared," she said, and meant it. Over the next month, Mara's world expanded in careful increments. Grant took her to meet with a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases, a sharp woman named Patricia Moreno who listened to Mara's story with the intensity of someone cataloging evidence for war. They filed for a restraining order, though Patricia warned that enforcing it against someone with Victor's resources would be challenging. They contacted the police in Riverside Heights, filing formal reports that felt both empowering and terrifying. And through it all, life in Grant's house continued its chaotic rhythm. Mara found herself becoming part of the machinery, not replacing the mother who was gone, but filling spaces that had been empty. She learned that Nora needed someone to braid her hair tightly before school, or she'd spend all day fidgeting with it. That Evan processed emotions through questions and needed patient answers even when they seemed clinical. That Rowan spoke more through his art than his words. That Ivy's fears were manageable if you warned her about changes before they happened. that Eli saw everything and needed someone to validate what he was seeing rather than dismissing his observations. She also learned things about Grant, that he drank his coffee black and too hot, that he worked himself to exhaustion because stillness meant thinking about loss, that he tucked each child in at night with specific rituals they'd established after their mother died, that he kept his wife's photos around the house, not because he couldn't let go, but because he wanted his children to remember they'd been loved completely. One evening in late December, while Mara was helping Ivy with a school project about family traditions, the little girl looked up from her glue stick and asked, "Are you going to stay forever?" The question stopped Mara's hands mid-motion. The other children, supposedly absorbed in their own activities around the living room, went very still, the kind of artificial casual that meant everyone was actually listening intently. Grant was in the kitchen, but Mara could feel his presence, his attention focused on how she would answer. "I don't know," Mara said honestly. "I'm still figuring out what my life looks like now, but I do know that being here, with all of you, has helped me remember that I'm more than what happened to me." Ivy considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd learned that adults didn't always tell the truth about important things. "Dad likes you. He smiles more when you're here." "Ivy!" Nora's voice carried warning from where she sat with her geometry homework. "What?" "He does. I'm not saying anything bad. I'm just saying he's happier." Ivy turned back to Mara with those wide, earnest eyes. "We're happier too. Except maybe Nora, but she's mad about everything since Mom died." "I'm not mad about everything," Nora protested, but her voice lacked heat. "I'm just careful." "You're allowed to be careful," Mara said gently. "You're allowed to protect your family. That's not something to apologize for." Nora looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then, so quietly Mara almost didn't hear, "You're kind of like family now, too." The words hit Mara like a physical thing, unexpected, overwhelming, terrifying in their implication. Before she could respond, Evan spoke up from his corner where he was building something with Legos. "According to my research, blended families are statistically common and can be highly functional when all parties communicate effectively and maintain clear boundaries while still—" "Evan, nobody needs your research right now," Nora interrupted, but she was almost smiling. "I'm just providing data. You're being a robot. Robots don't provide emotional support, which I am clearly attempting to—" "Kids." Grant's voice came from the kitchen doorway, warm with affection despite the interruption. "How about we focus on finishing homework and projects so we can do movie night?" The children's attention shifted immediately to lobbying for their preferred film choices, and the moment passed. But later, after the kids were in bed and Grant and Mara sat in their now customary positions on the couch, close but not touching, comfortable in shared quiet, he brought it up. "You know they're getting attached," he said softly. "All of them, even Nora with all her defenses. You're becoming part of their routine, part of their sense of normal." "I know," Mara said. "I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm not criticizing. I need to know what your plan is. Not because I want you to leave, but because I need to prepare them if you're going to. They've lost enough." Mara turned to look at him, really look at him. His face was lined with exhaustion and old grief, but also with something gentler, hope, maybe, or the possibility of it. In the weeks she'd lived in his home, she'd watched him father 5 children with a patience that seemed superhuman. She'd seen him work impossible hours to keep his business afloat while never missing a school event or doctor's appointment. She'd witnessed him break down exactly once, late at night, when he thought everyone was asleep, standing in front of his wife's photo and whispering apologies for all the ways he felt he was failing their children. She'd also felt the way the air changed when they were in the same room, the way his hand would accidentally brush hers when passing dishes at dinner, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, not with pity or desire, but with something more complex, recognition, maybe, understanding. "I don't have a plan," she admitted. 2 months ago, I thought if I could just escape Victor, that would be enough. I didn't think about what came after. I definitely didn't think I'd end up here, in your home, caring about your children, feeling things I'm probably not ready to feel." Grant went very still. "What kind of things?" Mara's heart hammered. They'd been dancing around this for weeks. This unnamed thing between them that felt too significant to acknowledge but too present to ignore. But maybe it was time to stop dancing. "Safe things," she said quietly. Warm things. Things I haven't felt in over a decade. Things that scare me because I don't trust my own judgment anymore. Victor made me believe love looked like control and violence. How do I know I'm not just transferring my dependence from one man to another? Because you're not dependent on me, Grant said firmly. You're staying in my house, yes. I'm helping you build your case, yes. But you're making your own choices. You're fighting your own battles. I'm just here, supporting from the sidelines. Is that all you want to be? The question escaped before Mara could stop it, vulnerable and raw. Supportive from the sidelines? Grant took a long breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd thought about this a great deal. What I want and what's right aren't always the same thing. You're still recovering from trauma. You're still married, technically, even though you're pursuing divorce. You're building a legal case that requires all your focus and energy. This is not the time for me to complicate your life by admitting that He stopped himself, shaking his head. It doesn't matter what I want. It matters to me, Mara whispered. They sat in the charged silence, the house creaking around them with familiar sounds. Finally, Grant reached out and took her hand. A simple gesture, but the first deliberate physical contact they'd shared beyond accidental brushes. His hand was warm, calloused from construction work, steady. I care about you, he said, more than is probably wise given the circumstances. But I also respect that you need time and space to figure out who you are outside of what Victor made you. So here's what I'm offering. Stay as long as you need. Be part of this family in whatever capacity feels right. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, we can talk about what this could be. But no pressure, no expectations, just presence. Mara felt tears burning her eyes. After 12 years of Victor's demands and conditions and requirements, the gift of patience and respect felt almost too precious to accept. Thank you, she managed. They sat there, hands linked, until Mara finally pulled away and retreated to her room where she could cry without an audience, tears of grief and relief and something that might have been hope. The holidays arrived with their complicated mix of joy and sorrow. Grant's parents came for Christmas, kind people in their 70s who'd clearly been briefed about Mara's presence and welcomed her with the careful gentleness reserved for broken things. They asked no questions about her past, just included her in the family traditions like she'd always been there. On Christmas morning, Mara woke to find a small wrapped package outside her door. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a bird in flight. The card read, "For new beginnings from the quintuplets and Dad." She wore it every day after that. But the new year brought complications. In mid-January, Patricia Moreno called with news that made Mara's blood run cold. Victor's filed a missing persons report, Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. He's claiming you disappeared following a mental health crisis related to your miscarriage. He's offered a reward for information leading to your safe return. And Mara, his people have connected you to Riverside Heights. They're canvassing the bus routes out of the city. Mara felt the room spin. How long until they find me? Impossible to say. You've been careful. No phone, no credit cards, no digital footprint. But small towns talk, and you've been living openly here for 2 months. Someone might make the connection. What do I do? We accelerate the timeline. File charges now before he can establish the narrative that you're mentally unstable. We go public with your story, with Dr. Reese's testimony, with everything we've gathered. We beat him to the punch. After the call, Mara sat in the empty house, Grant at work, kids at school, and tried to steady her breathing. She'd known this moment would come. She'd known she couldn't hide forever. But the reality of it was more terrifying than the anticipation had been. She was still sitting there when Grant came home early, summoned by Patricia's call to him as her emergency contact. He found her curled on the couch, shaking, and without a word sat down and pulled her against him. Mara let herself be held, let herself take comfort in his solid presence. We knew this would happen, Grant said quietly. We prepared for this. I'm not ready. Yes, you are. You're terrified, but you're ready. There's a difference. That evening, they told the children what was happening. Grant gathered them in the living room, and Mara explained as simply as she could that she'd be going public with her story soon, that there might be reporters or police around, that things might get scary for a little while. The quintuplets listened with varying degrees of understanding. Evan immediately began asking logistical questions about security protocols. Rowan said nothing but moved closer to Mara on the couch. Ivy's eyes filled with tears as she asked if bad men would come to their house. Eli just stared with those knowing eyes and finally said, "We won't let them take you." But it was Nora who surprised her. The girl who'd been most resistant to Mara's presence stood up and announced with fierce determination, "If anyone tries to hurt you, they have to go through all of us. You're family now. We protect family." The other children nodded in agreement, and Mara found herself crying as 5 8-year-olds gathered around her in a protective huddle, their small arms creating a fortress that felt stronger than any wall. 2 days later, Mara held a press conference organized by the Domestic Violence Center. Sarah Chen stood beside her as she read a prepared statement, her voice shaking but clear, detailing 12 years of abuse at the hands of Victor Hartwell, the escalating violence, the miscarriage he'd caused, the financial control, the isolation, the fear that had kept her silent for so long. The media erupted. Within hours, Victor issued a statement through his lawyers denying everything, calling Mara's claims a tragic manifestation of mental illness following her pregnancy loss. He expressed deep concern for her well-being and hoped she would accept the help she so desperately needs. But Dr. Reese stepped forward with her records. Then a former household staff member came forward, corroborating stories of violence she'd witnessed. Then another victim, a woman Victor had dated before Mara, shared her own story of abuse that matched Mara's pattern for pattern. The perfect image Victor had spent years building began to crack. The weeks that followed were exactly as brutal as Sarah had warned. Reporters camped outside Grant's house until he threatened to call the police for harassment. Victor's lawyers filed motions claiming Mara was violating her marital obligations by living with another man. Social media became a battleground of people defending Victor's reputation versus those supporting Mara's courage. Through it all, Grant's household became a fortress. His parents moved in temporarily to help manage the chaos. The children's school provided security, neighbors rallied, forming a protective barrier against the worst of the media intrusion. And slowly, painfully, the truth began to win. More evidence emerged, financial records showing Victor's complete control over Mara's accounts, testimony from Mara's former friends about how she'd been systematically isolated, security footage from the night of her escape showing her fleeing their home with visible injuries. The district attorney announced they were opening a criminal investigation. On a cold February afternoon, Mara sat in Patricia's office, reviewing the latest developments, when her phone rang, the new phone Grant had gotten her with a number only trusted people had. She didn't recognize the number, but Patricia nodded that she should answer. "Hello? Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice was professional, official. "This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Riverside Heights Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that Victor Hartwell was arrested this morning on charges of domestic violence, assault, and coercion. He's currently being held without bail given his resources and flight risk. I wanted you to hear it from us first." Mara's vision blurred. Patricia was already standing, moving toward her, but Mara waved her off. She needed to process this alone, needed to feel the weight of these words settle into her bones. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you for telling me." After she hung up, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she called Grant. "He's been arrested," she said when he answered. "Victor, they arrested him." Grant's sharp intake of breath carried through the phone. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." "I'm at Patricia's office, but Grant," her voice broke. "I need to see him. I need to see him in handcuffs. I need to look at him through prison glass and know he can't hurt me anymore. Is that crazy?" "No," Grant said firmly. "That's not crazy. That's taking back your power. I'll pick you up in 10 minutes and we'll go together. You're not doing this alone." The Riverside Heights courthouse was a granite building that had always intimidated Mara during her marriage. Victor had pointed it out once, joking about how he knew half the judges personally, how he could make anyone's life difficult if he wanted to. Now, walking up those steps with Grant beside her and Patricia on her other side, Mara felt something shift inside her chest. She was here by choice. She was here with allies. She was here to face the man who tried to destroy her, and she was still standing. The arraignment was brief, but profound. Victor stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suit and confident bearing stripped away. When his eyes met Mara's across the courtroom, she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. He was afraid. Of her. Of what she'd done by speaking the truth. The judge set a trial date and denied bail despite the protests of Victor's legal team. As Victor was led away, he twisted back to look at Mara one more time. She held his gaze steadily, refusing to look away, refusing to shrink. Then he was gone, and she was still there, breathing, alive, free. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but Patricia ushered them quickly to Grant's van. As they drove away, Mara watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror and felt something she hadn't felt in over a decade. Peace. Not complete peace. There would still be a trial, still be testimony to give, still be healing to do, but the kind of peace that comes from knowing the worst is over, that you've survived, that you're finally, truly safe. Grant reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his, holding on. When they returned to the house, the quintuplets were waiting on the front porch despite the cold, bundled in coats and looking anxious. The moment Mara stepped out of the van, they rushed her, 5 small bodies colliding with hers in a tangle of hugs and relieved exclamations. "Did they arrest him?" Nora demanded. "Is he in jail?" Evan asked. "Are you okay?" Rowan whispered. "Please don't leave," Ivy begged. "You're safe now," Eli stated, as if declaring it would make it permanently true. Mara sank down onto the porch steps, gathering all 5 children close, and let herself cry. Not from grief or fear this time, but from relief and gratitude and the overwhelming recognition that she'd found something she never expected. A family. Not the one she'd been born into, not the one she'd tried to build with Victor, but one that had formed around her brokenness and decided she was worth keeping anyway. "I'm safe," she told them, told herself, told the universe. "I'm finally safe." That night, after the children were asleep, Mara found Grant sitting on the back porch despite the February cold, looking up at stars barely visible through the light pollution. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For stopping that night, for giving me a place to stay, for helping me fight, for—" "You don't have to thank me," Grant interrupted gently. "Yes, I do. You saved my life. Not just by helping me escape Victor, but by showing me what kindness looks like, what family looks like, what—" She took a breath. "What love could look like, if I ever let myself try again." Grant turned to look at her, his expression careful, hopeful. "And are you letting yourself try?" Mara thought about everything that had happened since that November night. The fear and healing, the slow building of trust, the way Grant's presence had become as essential as breathing. She thought about his children who'd claimed her as family, about the life being built from broken pieces. "I can't make you promises about forever," she said honestly. "I'm still figuring out who I am outside of trauma, but I know I care about you. I know being here, with you and the kids, feels like the first real home I've had since I was a child. And I know that when I imagine my future now, you're in it." Grant's smile was slow, warm, transforming his tired face into something beautiful. "That's enough," he said. "More than enough. We can figure out the rest as we go." He kissed her then, gentle, patient, asking rather than demanding. Mara kissed him back, tasting possibility and new beginnings and the peculiar sweetness of choosing someone freely rather than being chosen by force. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying a little, emotional from the day's wait and the tentative hope of what was being built between them. "The kids are going to have opinions about this," Grant said, laughing softly. "Oh, I think they already do," Mara replied, remembering all the knowing looks and not-so-subtle comments. "Especially Eli." "Especially Eli," Grant agreed. They sat together in the cold, hands linked, watching their breath create clouds in the night air, and Mara marveled at how her life had transformed. From a woman with no name, no future, no hope, shivering on a bus stop bench, to this, to safety, family, and the fragile but growing possibility of love. The trial would come. There would be more battles to fight, more healing to do. But for now, in this moment, she let herself simply be, safe, chosen, home. The morning Mara was scheduled to testify arrived with deceptive calm, bright spring sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows, birds singing their territorial claims, the quintuplets eating breakfast with the chaotic normalcy that had become the soundtrack of her life. But underneath the ordinary surface, tension hummed like a live wire. Grant had taken the day off work, arranged for his parents to handle school pickup, and laid out Mara's clothes the night before with the same careful attention he gave to important construction bids. Patricia had called twice already to review key points, her voice carrying the controlled intensity of a general preparing for battle. Mara pushed scrambled eggs around her plate, her stomach too knotted to accept food. Across the table, 5 pairs of eyes watched her with varying degrees of worry. "You're going to be amazing," Nora said with the fierce confidence she'd developed over the past months. The girl who'd once viewed Mara with suspicion now wore a homemade bracelet that matched the one Mara had received at Christmas. 5 different colored threads braided together with a bird charm Nora had added herself. Statistically, witness testimony that includes specific sensory details and emotional context is more credible to juries, Evan offered, which was his version of encouragement. "You have both. Your recall is excellent." Rowan said nothing but slid one of his drawings across the table, a landscape showing a figure standing on a hilltop with the sun rising behind her. The message was clear: you're moving toward the light. Ivy climbed into Mara's lap without asking, something the anxious child only did when she was trying to offer comfort rather than seek it. "When you come home, can we make cookies? Chocolate chip cookies always make scary days better." Eli, who'd been silent throughout breakfast, finally spoke. "Are you scared of seeing him again?" The other children tensed, shooting Eli looks that ranged from annoyed to alarmed. But Mara had learned that Eli's directness was a gift, not a weapon. He asked the questions everyone else danced around because he understood that naming fear diminished its power. "Yes," Mara said honestly, "I'm terrified. Even though he's in handcuffs, even though there are guards and lawyers and a judge between us, part of me is still that woman who believed he could reach me anywhere. But I'm going to testify anyway, because being scared isn't a good reason to let him keep controlling my life." Eli nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Good. Because he should be scared of you now, not the other way around." Grant caught Mara's eye across the table, his expression conveying everything he couldn't say in front of the children: pride, concern, love that had grown from friendship into something deeper and more essential. They'd been careful around the kids, keeping physical affection minimal, taking things slowly. But the quintuplets weren't blind. They'd started calling Mara Essie a few weeks earlier, a name that meant essential in their private sibling language, and they'd stopped asking when she was leaving and started asking if she was staying forever. The courthouse loomed large and intimidating as Grant pulled into the parking garage. Patricia met them at the security entrance, flanked by Sarah Chen and another advocate named Marcus, who'd been instrumental in gathering witness testimony. "Victor's legal team is going to try to rattle you," Patricia said as they moved through metal detectors. "They'll imply you're lying for attention or money. They'll suggest your mental health is compromised. They'll make the miscarriage seem like your fault somehow. None of it is true, but you need to hear it without reacting emotionally. Can you do that?" Mara thought about 12 years of learning to control her reactions, to hide fear, to present whatever face Victor demanded. The irony wasn't lost on her. The survival skills her abuser had forced her to develop were the same ones that would help her testify against him. "I can do it," she said. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, separated from the general public by a low barrier that did nothing to muffle the aggressive whisper of pens on paper and the occasional camera shutter despite the no photography signs. Mara saw faces she recognized, former friends of Victor's who'd stopped calling after her disappearance, board members from his charitable foundation, even a few celebrities he'd courted for fundraising events. They stared at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to skepticism to outright hostility. And there, at the defense table in a tailored suit that made him look like the successful philanthropist rather than the accused abuser, sat Victor Hartwell. He'd lost weight during his months in custody, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. But his posture remained perfect, his expression carefully neutral, every inch the wronged husband suffering through his disturbed wife's delusions. When his eyes met Mara's, she saw the calculation there. He was still trying to intimidate her, still trying to remind her of his power. But something had changed in her since that November night. She held his gaze until he looked away first, a small victory that steadied her racing heart. The prosecution attorney, a woman named Rebecca Torres with a reputation for demolishing abusive men on the stand, called Mara forward. The walk to the witness box felt endless. Every step weighted with the knowledge that the next hours would determine not just Victor's fate, but her own ability to finally close this chapter. After being sworn in, Mara sat in the hard wooden chair and gripped the armrest to keep her hands from shaking. Rebecca approached with a gentle smile, establishing rapport before the questioning began. Mrs. Hartwell, can you tell us how you met Victor Hartwell? Mara took a breath and began. She described meeting Victor at a charity event when she was 23, fresh out of graduate school and working at a nonprofit that helped at-risk youth. He'd been charming, attentive, sweeping her into a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale. The proposal after 6 months, the wedding that was featured in society pages, the beautiful home, and the promise of a life built on love and purpose. When did things change? Rebecca asked. About 3 months after the wedding. Small things at first. He didn't like how I wore my hair or the friends I kept. He suggested I quit my job because it was beneath my status as his wife. I thought he was being protective. Mara's voice remained steady, clinical, the way she'd practiced. Then he started monitoring my phone calls, my emails. He took control of all our finances, giving me an allowance like a child. He isolated me from everyone I knew until the only people in my life were his friends, his associates, his staff. And the physical violence? Started about 6 months in. He slapped me during an argument about a dinner party where I'd supposedly embarrassed him by talking too much about my old work. He apologized profusely afterward, cried, bought me jewelry, promised it would never happen again. Mara looked directly at the jury as she spoke, making sure they saw her face, her truth. But it did happen again and again. Over 12 years, the violence escalated. Slaps became punches. Punches became worse. He broke my wrist once because I served dinner 15 minutes late. He gave me a concussion because I smiled at a waiter. Objection! Victor's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Winters, stood abruptly. The witness is providing a narrative designed to prejudice the jury rather than answering specific questions. Overruled, Judge Martinez said crisply. The witness is providing context relevant to the charges. Continue, Mrs. Hartwell. Mara continued, detailing the systematic abuse with the same careful precision Dr. Reese had used in her medical documentation. She described how Victor controlled every aspect of her life, how he used his public image as a shield, how he threatened to destroy her credibility if she ever spoke out. Then Rebecca asked the question that Mara had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Tell us about the pregnancy. The courtroom went very quiet. Even the reporters stopped their frantic note-taking. Mara's hands tightened on the armrests. I got pregnant 6 months before I escaped. I was terrified to tell Victor because he'd always said children would ruin our lifestyle, but I was also hopeful. I thought maybe a baby would change things, would give him a reason to be gentler. I was naive. What was his reaction when you told him? Rage. He accused me of trying to trap him, of being selfish and manipulative. But then his publicist convinced him that having a child would enhance his public image, the devoted family man. So he allowed the pregnancy to continue, but he made it clear the baby was a prop for his reputation, not a person he actually wanted. And what happened at 23 weeks? Mara felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. Not yet. I was having complications, bleeding, cramping. I asked Victor to take me to the doctor. He said I was being dramatic, that I was fine. We argued, and then he pushed me down the stairs of our home. 13 steps. I remember counting them as I fell. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Victor's expression remained neutral, but his hands clenched on the table. What happened after the fall? I miscarried, lost the baby at the hospital while Victor played the devastated husband for the medical staff. And when we were alone in my hospital room, he leaned close and told me that maybe now I'd remember my place was to be beautiful and silent, not to make demands or cause problems. He said if I ever told anyone what really happened, he'd make sure I was institutionalized as mentally unstable. Rebecca let that statement hang in the air before continuing. What made you finally decide to leave? I realized he was going to kill me eventually. Maybe not intentionally, but the violence was escalating, and I was breaking down physically and mentally. I started planning my escape 4 months after the miscarriage. I gathered money secretly, memorized the security system, waited for the right moment, and then I ran. Where did you go? I tried to get to a women's shelter in Harrington, but the bus broke down. I ended up stranded at a bus stop on Route 9 in the middle of the night, freezing and terrified. And that's where Grant Mercer found me and offered help. Rebecca wrapped up her direct examination with questions about Dr. Reese's documentation, the medical evidence of abuse, the financial control Victor had exerted. Then she turned Mara over to the defense, and Douglas Winters approached with the predatory confidence of someone preparing to destroy credibility. Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it true that you've struggled with depression and anxiety for most of your adult life? I developed depression and anxiety as a result of sustained abuse, Mara corrected. Before marrying Victor, I had no mental health diagnoses. But you were treated for mental health issues during your marriage, correct? Victor insisted I see a psychiatrist he selected, who prescribed medication without properly evaluating me. Later, we discovered that Doctor was a personal friend of Victor's who was helping to establish a paper trail of mental instability. Winters's jaw tightened. Isn't it true that after your miscarriage, you became obsessed with having a child, to the point where it affected your grip on reality? No. I grieved the loss of my baby, as any mother would. What affected my grip on reality was sustained physical and psychological abuse. You claim my client pushed you down the stairs, but the hospital report from that night says you told the attending physician you slipped and fell. Were you lying then, or are you lying now? Mara had prepared for this question with Patricia, but hearing it still hurt. I was lying then because Victor was standing right there, and I was terrified of what he'd do if I told the truth. The hospital was his territory. He'd donated to their cancer wing, knew half the staff by name. Who would believe me over him? Who indeed, Winters said with theatrical skepticism. Isn't it convenient that you've concocted this elaborate story after running away to live with another man? A man you're now romantically involved with, I understand? Objection! Rebecca was on her feet. Counsel is making statements rather than asking questions, and the witness's current relationship status is irrelevant to whether abuse occurred. Sustain, Judge Martinez said. Mr. Winters, ask questions or sit down. But the seed was planted. Mara could see some jury members exchanging glances, wondering if this was all an elaborate justification for an affair. Winters pressed on, attacking every aspect of her story. Why didn't she leave sooner? Why didn't she tell anyone? Why didn't she go to the police immediately after escaping? If the abuse was so severe, why weren't there more documented injuries? On and on, each question designed to make her seem unreliable, unstable, manipulative. Mara answered each one with the honest, painful truth. She didn't leave sooner because she was afraid and believed she had nowhere to go. She didn't tell anyone because Victor had isolated her and made it clear no one would believe her. She didn't go to the police immediately because she was focused on survival, not justice. There weren't more documented injuries because Victor was careful to hurt her in ways that didn't show or that could be explained away as accidents. Isn't it possible, Winters said in his closing questions, that you've constructed this entire narrative to justify abandoning your marriage and seeking financial gain from my client's considerable fortune? I don't want his money, Mara said, her voice ringing clear across the courtroom. I want him held accountable for 12 years of violence. I want other women to know that even powerful men can face consequences. And I want to be able to sleep at night without fear that he'll find me and finish what he started. No further questions, Winters said dismissively, as if her answer was beneath acknowledgement. Rebecca had a brief redirect, allowing Mara to clarify a few points Winters had twisted. Then, finally, Mara was released from the stand. Her legs shook as she walked back to the prosecution table, but she kept her head high. Grant was waiting in the hallway when the court broke for lunch. He pulled her into a fierce hug, and Mara let herself collapse against him, exhausted from holding herself together. You were incredible, he murmured into her hair. So strong, so clear. The jury heard you, Mara. They really heard you. Over the next 3 days, the prosecution built their case with methodical precision. Dr. Reese testified about the documentation she'd kept, her professional opinion that Mara's injuries were consistent with intimate partner violence, her regret that she hadn't been able to intervene sooner. The former household staff member described incidents she'd witnessed: Victor's explosive temper, Mara's visible injuries, the atmosphere of fear that permeated the house. The previous victim testified about Victor's pattern of abuse that precisely matched Mara's experience, establishing that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a consistent behavioral pattern. Financial experts demonstrated how Victor had systematically controlled every aspect of Mara's economic life. Medical experts explained the long-term effects of sustained trauma. The forensic psychiatrist who'd evaluated Mara testified that she showed clear signs of post-traumatic stress consistent with prolonged abuse, not the delusional disorder the defense claimed. Victor's defense tried to paint a picture of a troubled woman who'd misinterpreted her husband's concern as control, whose mental health issues had warped her perception of reality, who'd fabricated abuse to justify an affair. They called character witnesses who testified to Victor's charitable work, his public persona as a devoted husband, his reputation in the community. But the evidence was overwhelming. The patterns were too clear, the documentation too thorough. On the fifth day, Victor took the stand in his own defense, a risky move his lawyers had clearly advised against, but that his ego wouldn't allow him to avoid. He was polished, sympathetic, speaking about his deep love for Mara and his devastation at her deteriorating mental health. "I tried everything to help her," he said, his voice breaking in calculated places. "Therapy, medication, support. After the miscarriage, she became a different person. Paranoid, delusional, convinced I was trying to hurt her when all I wanted was to help her heal." But Rebecca Torres was a master at cross-examination. She methodically took apart his testimony, pointing out inconsistencies, confronting him with evidence that contradicted his claims, forcing him to explain away the medical documentation, the witness statements, the financial control. "Mr. Hartwell, if you were so concerned about your wife's mental health, why did you wait 3 days after she disappeared to file a missing persons report?" Victor hesitated, the first crack in his composure. "I thought she needed space. She'd been talking about visiting a friend, so I assumed—" "You assumed your wife, who, according to you, was mentally unstable and potentially suicidal, had gone to visit a friend, and you felt no urgency to ensure her safety for 3 full days? I was giving her space to calm down. Or you were hoping she'd disappear permanently, eliminating a threat to your reputation." Objection! Withdrawn. But the point was made. By the time Rebecca finished with him, Victor's polished facade had cracked. He'd lost his temper twice on the stand, his voice rising to a shout before his lawyers called for breaks. The jury saw glimpses of the man Mara had described: controlling, volatile, dangerous when challenged. Closing arguments happened on a gray Monday morning. Rebecca spoke with passion about the courage it took for Mara to escape and testify, about the clear evidence of sustained abuse, about the importance of believing victims and holding powerful men accountable. Winters argued reasonable doubt, suggesting that the prosecution's case was built on the unstable testimony of a troubled woman and circumstantial evidence that proved nothing. Then the jury was sent to deliberate. The wait was agony. Mara, Grant, and Patricia sat in a conference room near the courthouse, drinking bad coffee and trying to make small talk that kept circling back to the case. Grant's parents had the quintuplets, but Nora kept texting updates on homework completion and demands for information about when they'd know the verdict. 6 hours later, the bailiff called them back. The jury had reached a decision. Mara's hands shook as she took her seat in the courtroom gallery. Grant sat beside her, their fingers interlaced so tightly her knuckles ached. Victor was led in, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat that had settled into his posture. The jury forewoman stood, a woman in her 60s who'd taken careful notes throughout the trial. "On the charge of domestic violence, we find the defendant guilty." Mara's breath stopped. "On the charge of assault resulting in pregnancy loss, we find the defendant guilty." Grant's hand tightened on hers. "On the charge of coercion and unlawful restraint, we find the defendant guilty." For each charge, 8 in total, the forewoman repeated that single word that Mara had started to believe she'd never hear: guilty, guilty, guilty. Victor's face drained of color. His lawyers immediately began filing motions, but Mara barely heard them. The noise in her head was too loud, a roaring that was part relief, part disbelief, part something that felt like freedom beginning to take root. Judge Martinez set sentencing for 3 weeks later but denied bail, citing Victor as a flight risk and potential danger to the victim. As Victor was led away, he turned one final time to look at Mara. She saw fury there, and disbelief that she'd won, and underneath it all, fear. She smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not cruel, just the small, genuine smile of someone who'd survived and could finally breathe. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Patricia and Grant formed a protective barrier while Sarah Chen read a brief statement on Mara's behalf. Then they were in the van, pulling away from the building that had held so much fear and tension, and Mara felt something inside her chest loosen. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." Grant kissed her temple, careful of the cameras that might still be watching. "It's over. You're safe. You're free." When they arrived home, 5 children rushed out of the house and collided with Mara in a tangle of hugs and excited questions. "Did you win?" Nora demanded. "What's the verdict?" Evan asked. "Is he going to jail forever?" Rowan wanted to know. "Are you safe now?" Ivy's voice trembled with hope. "Tell us everything," Eli commanded. Mara knelt down so she was at eye level with all of them. "Guilty. On every charge. He's going to prison for a long time. And yes, I'm safe now. We're all safe." The children erupted in cheers, dancing around the driveway with the unselfconscious joy of kids who didn't fully understand the legal complexities, but knew their Essie had won and the bad man had lost. Grant's parents emerged from the house with dinner already prepared, understanding that this was a night for celebration, but also for the gentle processing of trauma finally resolved. They ate together at the big kitchen table. 10 people crammed around a space meant for 8, passing dishes and sharing stories and laughing in the way families do when they've survived something hard together. After the kids were in bed, Mara stood in the backyard looking up at stars that seemed brighter than they had any right to be. Grant found her there, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "How do you feel?" he asked. Mara considered the question carefully. "Lighter. Like I've been carrying a weight for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand straight. And now suddenly it's gone and I'm not sure what to do with all this space in my chest where fear used to live." "You fill it with whatever you want," Grant said. "Joy, peace, new dreams, whatever you choose." She turned to face him, this man who'd stopped on a freezing November night when he could have driven past, who'd opened his home and his life to a stranger, who'd stood beside her through every terrifying step of reclaiming her life. "I choose this," she said. "I choose you, and those 5 ridiculous children who've decided I'm family. I choose this chaotic, messy, beautiful life we're building. If you'll have me." Grant's smile transformed his face. "Mara Collins, I would be honored to build a life with you, not because you need rescuing, but because you're choosing to stay. That makes all the difference." He kissed her then, not the careful, tentative kisses they'd shared before, but something deeper. A promise of commitment and partnership and love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying again, but this time from joy rather than grief. 3 weeks later, at Victor's sentencing hearing, Mara delivered her victim impact statement. She spoke about 12 years stolen, about the baby she'd lost, about the woman she might have been if she'd never met him. She spoke about survival and the long road to healing, and she spoke about hope, about the family she'd found, about the future she was building, about her determination that other women would see her story and know they could escape too. Judge Martinez sentenced Victor Hartwell to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for 15. As he was led away, Mara felt the final thread of connection to him snap. She walked out of that courthouse for the last time with Grant beside her and 5 children waiting in the van, ready to go home. Not to Grant's house, not anymore. To their house, to their family, to the life they'd all chosen to build together from the broken pieces of their individual traumas. And for the first time in over a decade, Mara looked toward the future not with fear, but with anticipation of all the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary moments still to come. The months following Victor's sentencing unfolded with a gentleness that Mara had forgotten life could hold. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came the slow, careful work of rebuilding not just her life, but her sense of self that had been systematically dismantled over 12 years of abuse. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward once Victor was convicted. His lawyers, facing a client serving 25 years, negotiated a settlement that granted Mara a fair portion of the marital assets, not because Victor was generous, but because fighting her would only generate more negative publicity he could no longer control. Patricia handled everything with ruthless efficiency, ensuring that Mara would never have to worry about money again, while donating a significant portion to domestic violence organizations in the names of all the women who'd never escaped. But money, Mara discovered, was the easy part. The hard part was learning to trust her own judgment again, to make decisions without the paralyzing fear of consequences, to understand that disagreement didn't have to mean violence, and that love shouldn't require her to make herself small. Therapy helped. Dr. Angela Morrison, a trauma specialist recommended by Sarah Chen, met with Mara twice a week initially, helping her untangle 12 years of conditioning and fear. The work was exhausting, confronting memories she'd buried, recognizing patterns she'd normalized, grieving not just for the baby she'd lost, but for the woman she might have been if Victor had never entered her life. Grant attended some sessions with her, learning how to support someone recovering from intimate partner violence without becoming overprotective or treating her as fragile. The quintuplets even joined for a few family therapy sessions, processing their own grief over their mother's death while making space for Mara in their lives without feeling like they were betraying their mom's memory. Mom would have liked Essie, Eli announced during one of these sessions, his matter-of-fact tone making the observation even more profound. She always said the best people are the ones who've been broken but put themselves back together. Essie's doing that. Dr. Morrison smiled gently at the boy who saw too much. And how does it feel watching Essie put herself back together? Like watching Dad after Mom died, Eli said. Scary sometimes because you don't know if they'll actually make it, but also brave. It makes me think if they can survive their bad things, maybe I can survive mine too. The other children nodded in agreement. Even Nora, who'd spent months protecting her family from the intrusion of outsiders, but who now wore her Essie and the Quints friendship bracelet every single day. In late June, Grant approached Mara with a proposition that made her heart race with a mixture of excitement and terror. They were sitting on the back porch after the children were asleep, the summer air thick with humidity, and the sound of crickets providing a constant backdrop. I've been thinking about something, Grant said, his voice careful in the way it got when he was about to say something important. The kids start 4th grade in September. It's going to be a transition year. New teachers, more independence, lots of changes. And I was thinking it might help them to have some stability, some certainty about their family structure before everything else changes. Mara's breath caught. Grant, what are you saying? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I'm saying I love you. Not because you needed saving, not out of pity or obligation, but because you're brave and kind, and you make my children laugh, and you've shown all of us what it looks like to fight for yourself, even when you're terrified. And I know we've only been together officially for a few months, and I know you're still healing, and I know the timing might not be perfect, but... He paused, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Mara Collins, will you marry me? Will you choose to build this family with us permanently? Mara stared at the box, her mind spinning. 6 months ago, she'd been sitting on a bus stop bench with nothing but bruises and fear. 3 months ago, she'd been testifying against the man who'd tried to destroy her. And now this man, this good, patient, complicated man with 5 children who'd claimed her as family, was asking her to stay forever. I'm still broken in some ways, she whispered. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still flinch when people raise their voices. We're all broken in some ways, Grant interrupted gently. I'm still grieving my wife. My kids are still processing trauma. We're all works in progress, Mara, but we could be works in progress together, as a family, officially. She looked at his face, lined with exhaustion and old grief, but also with hope and love and the particular kind of patience that came from understanding suffering. She thought about the 5 children inside who'd given her a nickname that meant essential, who'd defended her to their classmates when rumors swirled, who'd taught her that family could be chosen rather than inherited. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, I'll marry you. I choose this. I choose all of you. Grant's smile was brilliant as he opened the box, revealing a simple silver band with a small diamond. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth or possession. Just a quiet promise. He slipped it onto her finger, and Mara marveled at how different this felt from when Victor had presented her with a massive engagement ring that now seemed more like a collar than a symbol of love. This ring fit. It belonged. It felt like coming home. "Should we tell the kids in the morning?" Mara asked, already imagining their reactions. Grant laughed. "Given that Evan helped me research appropriate engagement ring styles and Nora vetted the jeweler for ethical sourcing practices, I'm pretty sure they already know. But yes, we should make it official over breakfast. Fair warning, though, Ivy's been planning your wedding since March. She has a binder." "Of course she does," Mara said, laughing through tears of joy. They sat together in the summer darkness, engaged now, planning a future that felt miraculous in its ordinariness. No drama, no violence, no fear. Just two people who'd survived their own tragedies, choosing to build something new together. The announcement at breakfast the next morning went exactly as expected. Evan produced statistics about successful second marriages. Nora immediately began discussing ceremony logistics with military precision. Rowan quietly drew a sketch of what he imagined the wedding might look like. Ivy literally pulled out the promised binder with color-coded tabs for flowers, food, and family traditions, and Eli simply smiled and said, "Good. You needed to be officially family before 4th grade." "Why before 4th grade?" Mara asked, amused. "Because 4th grade is when they teach us about family trees and social studies," Eli explained. "And I want to be able to put you on ours without having to explain that you're just Dad's girlfriend. That's too complicated." The simplicity of child logic made Mara laugh, but it also made her cry a little, overwhelmed by how completely these children had accepted her into their lives. Planning the wedding became a family project. Mara and Grant wanted something small and meaningful, rather than a big production. They'd both been through enough drama for a lifetime and craved simplicity. They settled on a ceremony in their own backyard in early September, just before school started, with only close family and the friends who'd stood by them through everything. Patricia Moreno was invited, along with Sarah Chen and Dr. Reese. Grant's parents would be there, along with a few of his oldest friends and some neighbors who'd become chosen family. The quintuplets would stand with them at the altar, not as traditional attendants, but as full participants in the ceremony, because this wasn't just Mara marrying Grant. This was all 7 of them choosing to become an official family unit. In July, Mara did something she'd been avoiding for months. She went back to Riverside Heights for the first time since her escape. Not to the estate where she'd suffered for 12 years, but to Dr. Reese's office, and then to the cemetery where Victor had buried their baby, in a plot she'd never been allowed to visit. Grant offered to come with her, but Mara needed to do this alone. She needed to face her past without someone holding her hand, needed to prove to herself that she could return to the place of her trauma and leave again by choice. Dr. Reese welcomed her with a long hug and tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," the doctor said. "I wish I could have done more when you were my patient, but I'm grateful you found the strength to save yourself." "You did more than you know," Mara assured her. "Your documentation, your testimony, you gave me the evidence I needed to fight back. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." They talked for an hour about healing and justice and the long road ahead. Then Dr. Reese gave Mara the address of the cemetery and a bouquet of white roses. The grave was in a section reserved for children, marked with a small headstone that read, "Baby Hartwell, beloved son." Victor had never even given their child a name, reducing him to a possession, a loss, a footnote in the Hartwell family legacy. Mara knelt in the grass, placing the roses against the stone, and finally let herself grieve properly. Not the suffocated, fearful grief she'd experienced under Victor's control, but the full, wailing grief of a mother who'd lost her child to violence. She cried until she had no tears left, until the sun began to set, until the cemetery groundskeeper gently asked if she was okay. "I am now," she said, and meant it. Before she left, she spoke to the grave one final time. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry he took you from me before you even had a chance to live. But I want you to know that I survived. I escaped. I made sure he faced justice. And I'm going to live a beautiful life in your memory, with 5 children who need me and a man who loves me, and a future that's mine to build. I hope that wherever you are, you know you mattered. You still matter. You always will. She drove back home as the sun set, feeling lighter than she had in months. The past was still there, still painful, but it no longer had the power to control her present. August brought its own challenges and joys. The divorce was finalized, officially severing Mara's legal ties to Victor. She reclaimed her maiden name, Mara Collins, but when Grant mentioned she'd be changing it again after the wedding, she surprised him. Actually, I was thinking about hyphenating, she said. Collins Mercer. I don't want to erase who I was before Victor, but I also want to belong to this family completely. Is that okay? That's perfect, Grant said, kissing her forehead. Mara Collins Mercer. It suits you. The children started practicing writing their own hyphenated names. Nora Collins Mercer, Evan Collins Mercer, Rowan Collins Mercer, Ivy Collins Mercer, Eli Collins Mercer. Ivy made signs for each of their bedroom doors with their new names decorated with flowers and glitter. Evan created a spreadsheet tracking all the legal documentation that would need to be updated. Nora researched the history of hyphenated surnames and wrote a 3-page report on feminist naming practices. Rowan drew a family tree showing how they'd all fit together. And Eli simply added Collins to his artwork signatures, treating it as a natural evolution rather than a dramatic change. 2 weeks before the wedding, Mara received an unexpected letter. It was from Victor, smuggled out through his lawyers despite the restraining order that prohibited direct contact. Patricia advised her not to read it, but Mara needed to know what he'd say now that everything was over and he'd lost completely. The letter was predictable in its manipulations. He claimed to have found God in prison, to have recognized the error of his ways, to hope that Mara could find it in her heart to forgive him someday. But buried in the performative contrition was a line that revealed he understood nothing about what he'd done. I hope you find happiness with your new family, even if it means erasing the years we spent building a life together. Mara read it twice, then handed it to Grant. He still doesn't get it. He thinks what we had was a life worth building. He genuinely believes he loved me in his twisted way. Does that bother you? Grant asked carefully. No, Mara said, surprising herself with the truth of it. It just makes me sad for him. He's going to spend the next 15 years in prison, convinced he's a victim of circumstance, rather than accepting that he's a violent man who destroyed people he claimed to love. That's his burden to carry now, not mine. She threw the letter away without responding. Victor had taken enough of her words, her energy, her life. He would get no more. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect September weather, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, temperatures warm enough for the outdoor ceremony, but cool enough that standing in the sun wouldn't be miserable. Grant's parents had helped transform the backyard into something magical. White chairs arranged in a small semicircle, an arch covered in flowers that Ivy had helped select, tables decorated with Rowan's hand-painted centerpieces, string lights hung between trees for the reception that would follow. Mara stood in the bedroom she now shared with Grant, looking at herself in the mirror. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, tea-length, with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved when she walked. Nothing like the elaborate, suffocating wedding gown Victor had insisted on 12 years earlier. This dress felt like her, like the woman she was becoming, rather than the woman someone else demanded she be. A knock at the door brought Nora, already dressed in her chosen outfit of a navy blue dress with sensible flats, and her hair in the fierce braid she preferred. Everyone's here. Are you ready? I think so, Mara said. How do I look? Nora studied her with the critical eye she applied to everything. Then her expression softened into something almost tender. You look happy, like you're not scared anymore. That's the best thing you could look like. Mara pulled the girl into a hug. Thank you for giving me a chance. I know I'm not your mom, but you're our Essie, Nora interrupted firmly. You don't need to be mom. We already had her, and we'll always love her. But we love you too, in a different way, for being brave enough to choose us even when you were still figuring out how to choose yourself. The ceremony was short and perfect. Grant's friend Mark, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion, officiated with humor and warmth. But the most powerful moment came when the quintuplets stepped forward to speak. They'd written their own vows to Mara, taking turns reading from a piece of paper they'd collaborated on together. Nora went first, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. We promise to remember that you chose us when you didn't have to. That means something. Evan was next, reading his section with characteristic precision. We promise to communicate openly and work through conflicts with mutual respect and understanding, while acknowledging that families are complicated and that's okay. Rowan's voice was soft but clear. We promise to include you in our memories and traditions, while also making new ones that belong to all of us together. Ivy held Mara's hand as she spoke, her voice trembling but determined. We promise to try not to be scared of you leaving and to trust that you love us even when things are hard. Finally, Eli looked up at Mara with those ancient, knowing eyes. We promise to keep seeing you, the real you, not what anyone else says you should be, because we like who you really are. Mara was crying openly by the time they finished, and when she spoke her own vows to them, her voice shook with emotion. I promise to show up every day, to pack your lunches and help with homework and listen to your problems even when I'm tired. I promise to never try to replace your mother, but to honor her memory while making my own place in your hearts. I promise to keep fighting to become the person you deserve to have in your life. And I promise that choosing your family is the best decision I've ever made. Then she turned to Grant, and they exchanged their own vows. Simpler, more private, but no less meaningful. They promised partnership and patience, understanding and support, love that was chosen rather than demanded. When Mark pronounced them married, Grant kissed Mara with the gentleness that had characterized their entire relationship, and the small gathered group erupted in applause. The quintuplets rushed forward, enveloping them both in a group hug that nearly knocked everyone over, and Mara laughed through her tears at the beautiful chaos of her new family. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted: casual, joyful, full of good food and better company. Grant's parents told embarrassing stories about him as a child. Patricia gave a toast about courage and justice that had everyone crying again. Sarah Chen spoke about the importance of believing survivors and creating communities of support. Dr. Reese raised a glass to second chances and new beginnings. But the most memorable moment came when Eli asked if he could share something. The 8-year-old walked to the center of the yard, holding a piece of paper, and waited until everyone was quiet. I drew this last night, he said, unfolding the paper to reveal a family portrait. It showed 7 people standing together, Grant in the center, with 5 children around him, and Mara standing slightly to the side but with all the children's hands reaching toward her, connecting her to the group. This is our family now. It's different than it was before Mom died, but it's still good. Maybe even better in some ways because we all chose to be together. Essie didn't have to choose us. We're loud and messy and sometimes difficult, but she did choose us. And we chose her. And I think that's what family is supposed to be. People who choose each other and keep choosing each other even when it's hard. He walked over and handed the drawing to Mara. This is for you, so you remember that you belong here. Mara took the drawing with shaking hands, looking at the 7 figures Eli had captured with surprising skill and emotional depth. In the drawing, her face showed the same expression she'd seen in his earlier portrait, standing in the doorway between past and future. But in this one, she was stepping forward, into the light, toward the family, waiting with open arms. Thank you, she whispered, pulling Eli into a hug. I'll treasure this forever. As the afternoon faded into evening and the string lights came on, casting everything in warm golden glow, Mara found herself standing slightly apart from the celebration, watching her new family. Grant was teaching Ivy and Rowan how to dance, while Evan provided running commentary on proper waltz technique, despite having no actual knowledge of dancing. Nora and Grant's mother were discussing the wedding cake with serious concentration. Eli sat with Dr. Reese, showing her his collection of drawings and answering her questions about his artistic process. Patricia appeared beside Mara, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She offered one to Mara with a smile. How are you feeling, Mrs. Collins Mercer? Overwhelmed, Mara admitted. Happy, terrified, grateful, all of it at once. That sounds about right for a wedding day, Patricia said, but also for everything else you've been through. You know, I've worked hundreds of domestic violence cases in my career. Most of them don't end like this. Most survivors spend years, sometimes their whole lives, trying to feel safe again. But you fought back, you testified, you helped put a dangerous man in prison. And then you built a whole new life on top of the ruins of what he destroyed. That's remarkable, Mara. I couldn't have done it without help, Mara said. Without you, Sarah, Dr. Reese, Grant, the kids. I'm not brave on my own. None of us are brave on our own, Patricia replied. That's the secret nobody tells you. Courage isn't individual, it's communal. We're brave because other people believe we can be. You were brave because you had people standing with you, and now you get to be that person for someone else someday. That's how we change the world, one survivor at a time, choosing to stand up and fight back. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration, until Grant appeared and claimed Mara for a dance. As they swayed together under the string lights, surrounded by the people who'd helped them both survive their respective traumas, Mara felt something she'd never experienced before: complete peace. Not the absence of problems or the erasure of trauma, but the deep, bone-level certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with people who loved her, not despite her brokenness, but because they understood that breaking and healing were both parts of what made her whole. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, his voice low near her ear. "I'm thinking about that night," Mara said, "when you found me at the bus stop. I was certain my life was over, that I'd either freeze to death or Victor would find me or I'd just disappear. I couldn't imagine a future beyond the next hour. And now, look at us." "Now look at us," Grant echoed, pulling back to meet her eyes. "Married, family, building something beautiful from all our broken pieces." "Do you ever wonder what your wife would think of all this?" Mara asked carefully. They'd talked about Grant's first wife many times, but she still worried about overstepping. Grant considered the question seriously. "I think she'd be happy that the kids are laughing again, that our house feels like a home instead of a mausoleum, that I found someone who understands grief without being consumed by it." He smiled. "And I think she'd like you. You're both fighters in your own ways, both stronger than you look, both the kind of person who shows up for people who need them." "I hope I'm worthy of that comparison," Mara said. "You are," Grant assured her, "more than you know." As the evening progressed and the children began to tire, showing up in pajamas for the last hour of the reception, because Ivy had insisted they needed to be comfortable, Mara felt the rightness of everything settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her family now, messy, complicated, built from loss and survival, but hers completely. When the last guests finally left and Grant's parents herded the exhausted children upstairs to bed, Mara and Grant stood in their transformed backyard, looking at the remnants of the celebration. Paper plates and champagne glasses, Rowan centerpieces, the arch still covered in flowers that would need to be taken down tomorrow. "We should clean up," Mara said without much conviction. "Or we could leave it until morning and go to bed," Grant suggested. "It's been a long day. They chose bed, climbing the stairs to their shared room, which still felt new and slightly unreal to Mara. This was her space now, legitimately and permanently. No one could take it away. No one could tell her she didn't belong. As they lay together in the darkness, Grant's arm around her waist and her head on his chest, Mara spoke into the quiet. "I love you. I don't think I've said it enough, but I do. I love you and I love your children, and I love this life we're building. Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else, including myself." Grant kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept help. Thank you for fighting to reclaim your life. Thank you for choosing us when you could have chosen anywhere else to rebuild." "There was nowhere else," Mara said simply. "You were always where I was supposed to end up. I just didn't know it yet." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time since her childhood, Mara slept through the entire night without nightmares. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys, the quintuplets navigating middle school and then high school with all the drama that entailed, Grant's business expanding until he had to hire additional help, Mara returning to school to finish the social work degree she'd abandoned when she married Victor, and eventually opening a private practice specializing in trauma recovery. They had fights about parenting styles and money and whose turn it was to drive carpool. They had moments of grief when the kids mourned their first mother, or when Mara struggled with PTSD triggers. They had stress and exhaustion and the ordinary difficulties of blending a family. But they also had laughter and tradition and the deep satisfaction of watching 5 children grow into remarkable young adults who understood resilience because they'd lived it. They had quiet mornings drinking coffee on the back porch and chaotic holiday dinners with the whole extended family. They had date nights and inside jokes and the particular intimacy that comes from surviving hard things together. On the 10-year anniversary of the night Grant found Mara at the bus stop, they returned to that same bench, now with a small memorial plaque that read, "Where Hope Begins, November 2024, placed by the town council after Mara's story became public." The bench had become a symbol in their community, a reminder that stopping to help someone in need could change everything. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Mara asked, sitting on the bench that had once represented her lowest moment. "Some days it feels like yesterday," Grant said. "Some days it feels like a lifetime ago. Mostly it just feels like exactly where we were supposed to end up." They sat there for a while, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Around them, life continued, cars passing, people going about their business, the ordinary magic of the world turning. And somewhere in the distance, 5 18-year-olds were probably arguing about college applications and future plans, getting ready to launch into the world with the foundation of love and resilience their parents had built for them. They would be okay. They would carry forward the lessons of survival and choice, and the knowledge that family was something you built rather than something that simply happened to you. Mara reached over and took Grant's hand, their fingers interlacing automatically after years of practice. "Ready to go home?" "Always," Grant said, smiling at her with the same warmth he'd shown that first night when he'd stopped his van and asked if she was okay. They walked back to the car together, leaving the bench behind, but carrying with them the story of everything that had happened since. The fear and the fighting, the healing and the hope. The beautiful, imperfect life they'd built from the ruins of their separate traumas. And as they drove home through streets now familiar and safe, Mara looked at the ring on her finger. Not the first one that had represented ownership and control, but the second one that represented choice and partnership. She thought about the woman she'd been, shivering and broken on that bench, unable to imagine a future. If she could go back and tell that woman anything, it would be this: you survive, you fight, you find people who see your worth even when you can't see it yourself. You build a family from the most unlikely materials. You reclaim every single piece of yourself that was stolen. And someday, you sit in the sunshine of your own backyard, surrounded by people who love you, and you realize that surviving was just the beginning. Living, really living, is what comes after. And that's where the real story starts.